Brilliant. So, yeah, really excited to introduce Arlene for you all. She is the Vice Chair of UPenn for Arts and Humanities and works really closely with the subcommittee and is all around just an amazing person. But Arlene-Holmes-Henderson is a Professor of Classics Education and Public Policy at Durham University. And she holds the British Academy Innovation Fellowship from 2022 to 2024. After studying classics at Oxford, Harvard, and Cambridge, Arlene qualified as a school teacher and taught in high schools for more than a decade before returning to academia. As mentioned, she's Vice Chair of the University's Policy Engagement Network with a national responsibility for arts and humanities, and she's also an expert advisor to international governments, parliaments, and assessment agencies. And in 2023, Arlene was awarded an MBE for Services for Education by King Charles III in their birthday honours. Please welcome Arlene.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that really kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Brilliant. Can you see this okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Brilliant. Yeah, so I'm going to talk for the next 15 minutes or so, giving a perspective from my role as Vice Chair of UPenn with kind of national remit for arts and humanities, but also from my kind of personal position as an arts and humanities researcher who does a lot of policy engagement. And my idea here is to give a little bit of an overview of what I see in the sector, but also to stimulate discussion. And I hope very much that following my presentation, we will have discussion and conversation. So you'll see that I've titled my presentation today, Asserting the Arts and Humanities for Policy. And you'll see that my position here is encouraging. I think what arts and humanities researchers and those who support arts and humanities researchers, I think what we need to be doing is asserting the value that we can bring and the benefits we can add to informing and influencing policy. So in conversations that I have with policymakers, it transpires that a lot of the impressions that people have of arts and humanities researchers is that basically all we do is this. All arts and humanities researchers do is sit in libraries on their own, doing sole research, looking at books. And I know there's lots and lots of arts and humanities researchers on the call today, and I'm sure you're very aware of the fact that this is not what all arts and humanities researchers do. They don't all sit in libraries researching on their own using only books. Some do. And I think it's important to remember that some of our colleagues do desk-based research, which relies on books and libraries, but also relies on things like this. Archives. Of course, arts and humanities researchers rely on archival evidence in the UK and internationally, and this too is an important part of arts and humanities research. But I think the impression that a lot of policy colleagues have is that this is all that arts and humanities researchers do. They only sit in libraries working on their own, or they disappear into basements that look a bit like this, filled with archival documents, and get their kicks from first thing in the morning till last thing at night by looking at archives. And my reality is that I have never visited an archive. I'm a classicist and I have never visited an archive. My research does not involve this, nor does a lot of my arts and humanities colleagues. Research simply does not focus on this at all. Of course, we have disciplines within the arts and humanities which don't immediately appear to be relevant to current policy priorities. So early modern historians, or people who are historians of music, or those who study illuminated manuscripts or art history. There are some in the policy community who might question, well, how can their evidence help me solve my current policy challenges? My suggestion here is that knowledge brokers and arts and humanities academics themselves develop the answer to that question. We will be so much more successful when it comes to using our research to inform policy thinking and potentially changing policy if we're able to answer that question. How does early modern history research inform policy thinking? If we don't have an answer to that question, we're not going to get the first 30-minute meeting with the policy community. And knowledge brokers can offer a lot to arts and humanities academics here, but there's a lot that academics can do themselves to start answering that question. So I wanted to showcase a couple of examples here of people who are arts and humanities researchers who I think are doing fantastic engaged work, which is in fact having positive results on the direction of the policy community. So one is Jasjit Singh, who's based at the University of Leeds. He did the Arts and Humanities Research Council Engaging with Government course. I know this because I did the Arts and Humanities Research Council Engaging with Government course, which is based at the Institute for Government. And he came back to visit my cohort to say, I did this 3-day course, and these are the ways in which my research in religious studies and theology is now having an impact on the policy community. So his very focused research in religion and the history of religion is now informing not only priorities around radicalisation of young people and members of society, but also around housing and homelessness and migration for particular communities within England and now internationally. And you'll see I've shared a couple of posters here of the type of engaged research and the type of public engagement he's doing, which reflects the policy engagement which he has been invited to do on an increasing basis. So I think he's a fantastic example of somebody who has traditional arts and humanities research, but is having a big impact in terms of his engagement. Another is Peter Dunn. He has also visited this AHRC Engaging with Government course at the Institute for Government as an alumnus. Peter is a legal scholar, so he is an academic lawyer, and his policy engagement has been mostly at the European level, where he has been looking specifically at sexual orientation discrimination and the labour market, but also thinking about how his research can lift up the voices of children and families who are navigating the legal system with non-traditional gender identities. Peter is regularly called on to give evidence, and when he speaks about this for arts and humanities researchers, he says his legal training didn't give him the preparation of how to speak to the policy community. This is something which he learned at the Institute for Government on this 3-day course, but it's also something that he's learned by making mistakes along the way. And I think this is a key message that we have to learn from the researchers who are doing policy engagement based on arts and humanities research. A lot of it is trial and error. How can we get away from trial and error and help people feel a little bit more confident and competent via training before they start their policy engagement? I know that we've got some languages experts on the call today, so you'll be delighted to see this case study that I've chosen of Wendy Ayres-Bennett, who does so much for languages in government. I think this is a really great example of somebody whose research is, again, fairly traditional, looking at languages and literature, but she has pivoted her research agenda to help answer some of the key priorities that various government departments have about the role of languages in and for government. And this particular economic value report has been very important in terms of unlocking investments from Treasury, but also helping government departments that don't have an obvious link to languages, thinking about how they might prioritise these going forward. So I've given you 3 examples of academics who have traditional research trajectories in arts and humanities, but who have pivoted their research agenda in order to become more policy focused. I'm going to ask a big question now. What is academia for? And I think this sits at the heart of where we go next as a subcommittee, as a sector of arts and humanities academics. Have these 3 academics made a wise choice to pivot their research agenda and to do this policy engagement? Is this what academia is for? If we think about possible answers to this question, I think a lot of people would say academia is definitely about research and scholarship. It's definitely about education. I think there are some people who would also say, yeah, academia is about society. It's about making things better. It's about using research and evidence in order to inform how things develop in future for citizens. But I would also say that there are many university promotion and progression structures which do not recognise society. So I've given you a couple of examples of academic workload models here, right? Many more exist, but on an education track, so people whose contract is mostly about teaching, they might be expected to allocate 80% of their time to teaching and 20% to admin at departmental and university level. People on research track, if they're very lucky, they might get 40% of their time teaching, 40% admin, 40% research, and 20% admin, or they might have 40% teaching, 20% admin, 20% research, and 40% admin. Where does policy engagement sit in academic workload? Where does policy engagement fit with promotion and progression criteria? Is it a good choice for arts and humanities researchers to prioritise spending their time giving evidence to all-party parliamentary group inquiries, to submitting written or oral evidence to consultations for local, regional, national, international governments? Is it a good use of their time to have collaborative partnerships with policy colleagues which result in publications or which result in business cases for Treasury? Where does it fit? And will they get any recognition for it? If the promotion from lecturer to senior lecturer or senior lecturer to reader or associate professor to professor is based on research and teaching, I think we have a problem. I would love to be in a situation where all of my arts and humanities colleagues across the country are receiving directly into their own email inboxes UPenn News, UPenn newsletter on a weekly basis. Are we there yet? No. Could we get there? Potentially with your help, we could. I think UPenn doesn't have great brand awareness among the arts and humanities sector, and I think we as a group have to work together to improve that. I know that knowledge brokers often get the UPenn weekly update and then send targeted emails to individuals saying, I saw this and thought you might be interested in these one or two specific things. I would love us to get to a point where academics think this is part of their job. So I've summarised for you where I think there are 5 key barriers to policy engagement with arts and humanities research. Fundamentally, I think the first is lack of funding. And I know we've got some funders on the call, so I'm looking forward to some conversations later. I think the lack of funding is on the research side. If we want people to prioritise using their time to work with the policy community, they need bought out of teaching, or they need bought out of admin. And where does the money come from for that? There's not a lot of internal funding available for that. So we look to external funders like the British Academy and AHRC, and it would be great if there could be a bit more designated policy engagement funding or calls which indicate that specifically that is what this funding pot is being made available to do. I've mentioned already that I think there is a strategic failure to recognise and reward policy engagement within academic workloads. I don't think this can be solved at a national level. I think this has to be solved at an institutional level. But if we're not having the conversations, nothing will change. I think there's a lack of role models. And I think that's partially because we don't have case studies of academics in arts and humanities disciplines, which are collated, where we can easily direct a music scholar or a history scholar or a classic scholar or a theology scholar and say, hey, there's this collected volume of case studies of people who have had recent successful results in sharing their research with policy. This would be a game changer, I think, in showing arts and humanities academics that this is possible and beneficial. I'm going to be working on this project this summer. I hope we can get to that point by October, but I've got no funding for this. I'm getting a Laidlaw scholar at Durham to help me with this. Where will they be made available? Maybe on the UPenn website, maybe on the BA website, maybe on AHRC website, not sure yet. But I do think that we need this if we want to incentivise people to think that they can do it. They can see somebody in their discipline to whom they can ask questions. I think there's a lack of training specifically for arts and humanities researchers. I do a lot of free training for UPenn and for the British Academy Early Career Network. But I do think that it's a little bit different for arts and humanities researchers than it is for researchers in other disciplines. And it would be great to see the Engaging with Government course that's funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council opened up with more places. There are only 20 places available on an annual basis. It would be fantastic if more people could benefit from that experience. And finally, this is a bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. The areas of research interest don't currently invite contributions from arts and humanities researchers because they're phrased in such a way that they are exclusive of the type of research that we do. If you take a look at them, you'll see that they talk a lot about data. They mention science 1,160 times. They mention languages once. Even the ARI database funded by ESRC, why is the example that's grayed out that you can type in keyword from your research? Why is that example, e.g. renewable energy? Wouldn't it be so much more inclusive if that grayed out example could be poverty, homelessness, migration? It would just be inviting and inclusive to the arts and humanities research community, who I would say needs it the most. So I'm going to finish up now by identifying some next steps. The next steps that I think we need to take are start earlier, policy engagement for postgraduate students in arts and humanities. I think we need to grow this earlier. I think we need to train the policy community to engage with the arts and humanities research community and explain to them what the benefits of doing that are. And we're doing that already via the policy profession and the analysis and government function. I think that the British Academy and AHRC can help us to showcase good examples, which will raise the visibility and profile of arts and humanities research influencing policy. And finally, I think this group is absolutely fundamental because we need to be at the forefront of local, regional, national, and international developments to drive the agenda forward. So to end, I think that the arts and humanities sector is not in great shape across the UK at the moment, but I do think that policy engagement is one way in which we can tell a very positive story about its value and relevance in the 21st century. So as well as asserting arts and humanities for policy engagement, I think we should also celebrate the successes that we've had across the sector. Very happy to follow up via email or via Twitter. Please do get in touch and we can continue the conversation.
That was terrific. Thank you so much, Arlene. I'm sure lots of us have got so much like food for thought from your talk. So we now have a couple of 10 minutes just to have some bit of Q&A or discussion around this. So if you have any questions for Arlene, please just put them in the chat or just raise your hand and I'll just either read them from the chat or I'll call you to ask that question directly. While people are just typing up their questions or just thinking about it, I just wanted to pick up on a point that you mentioned about the training and actually about the kind of, I guess, the need for training, but also the need for training quite early on. And I think that's really, really reflected in my experience supporting lots of researchers. I can see lots of early career research, especially really seeing policy impact as an integral part of what it means to be a researcher. And I was wondering if you think that there is a space for policy engagement training specifically in DTPs.
Yes, absolutely. So I've been invited to offer some training for DTPs and the feedback has been really positive, either from students who feel like they already have enough to be able to contact policymakers and say, I've got some interim findings that I think you might be interested in, or students who say, I'm nowhere near being ready to have a conversation with the policy community, but it is so great to know where to look once I've got those results. So thank you for, just demystifying this landscape for us. So I think DTPs are a great place to think about integrating some policy engagement. And I do think that there is an added level of authenticity when this comes from a researcher. Knowledge brokers are absolutely brilliant and they perform a an essential part in this ecosystem, but my experience is that researchers like to hear examples from researchers because they can imagine themselves in that role. So if it can be a tag team, all the better.
That's amazing. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, actually. So Amanda asks, in a previous UPenn training session, Arlene mentioned about signing on to the mailing list of APPGs. Could you talk a little bit more about what to do once you're on the mailing list, please? I know that refers to, I think, another session that you ran previously that was also super useful.
Sure, yeah. So this was how I kind of got into policy engagement initially. Was I just went through the register of all party parliamentary groups, which is updated on an annual basis, and I did a keyword search for all of the kind of words that I thought my research was in some ways linked to see which all party parliamentary groups might align well with my research interests. And it turned out there was one that was very, very close to what I was researching. And so I contacted them and asked to be put on their distribution list. And it turned out that they then had a national inquiry and they invited me to offer to submit some evidence. And then this snowballed in a way that you can find out about later if you come to the session that Pascal and I are offering at 2 o'clock. So the advice that I give researchers now is go to the register, do a keyword search, find out if there are any party parliamentary groups that align well with your research, ask to be put on the mailing list, and then it's kind of up to you. So if all you want to do is be invited to the meetings and listen, great. If what you really want to do is get a 20-minute slot at one of those meetings to share your research and hear about how your research might answer some of the APPG's current areas of priority thinking, then that's definitely something you can offer to do. If it's something that you think you might want to expand as part of a collaborative partnership, then you could set up a meeting with the Secretariat and perhaps 1 or 2 members of the APPG to say, I'm actually thinking of applying for some external funding for a project. Would the APPG like to join as a partner? So I think there are lots of possibilities, and it's kind of up to you in terms of capacity and in terms of how deep you want the relationship to go, whether you want to be a listener or whether you want to be a participator.
That's fab. Okay, we've got a couple of more questions. I know that we've got a couple of minutes before the panel, so I'll try. Let's see how many we can get through. Stephanie's asking, in my experience as a knowledge broker, many arts humanities academics, or generally academics focusing on qualitative research, don't feel that policymakers would be interested in this sort of evidence. Sorry, this is not a question, but I just guess more of a comment. But I didn't know if you had any thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so my experience is kind of mixed on this. First of all, I'll say that most of the research that I've done has been qualitative, and the response from policy colleagues has been, this is great, but when we produce a business case for Treasury, we need graphs. We need data. So like, can we work together to find a way in which like we can make these words into something which fits our mold? And for me, that's been great. That's been a very useful learning experience. But the other thing that they've said to me, and which has become clear along the way, is that the policy community would much rather have an excellent researcher, an excellent communicator who's an okay researcher, than an excellent researcher who's an okay communicator. So if you can distill, 3 books worth of qualitative findings into half a page of interesting bullet points, I don't think that we should be worried about sharing qualitative research. I think what we need to be really worried about is making it interesting and relevant.
Yeah. And I think the next question actually picks up on this point from Pascal. She asks, could you offer some reflections on the types of evidence that arts humanities researchers can produce and how we can take that evidence to policymakers and convince them that it's as valid or even more appropriate than STEM evidence for those areas of policymaking?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think I'm going to suggest anything very innovative or creative here. The types of evidence that I think we can produce are peer-reviewed articles, or books. Do they want to read the peer-reviewed articles and books? No. Do they want to read executive summaries and 2-page briefings? Yes. But my experience is also that one government department has a slightly different preference for how these things are presented to another government department. And even within a government department, one policymaker can have a slightly different preference over another policymaker. So the longer I've been doing this, the more assertive, I guess, I've become. And say two things. First thing, can you give me an example of one of these that you like? So a researcher that you've worked with previously who's done a piece of work that you like, so that I've got a template of what a good one looks like. Secondly, I've got much better at saying, I have precisely 90 minutes to work on this for you. You tell me how you think I can most productively use these 90 minutes. And this is the result of having spent a lot more than 90 minutes previously on previous projects to be very successful, but definitely compromised health and well-being.
That's fab. Okay, let's see if we can squeeze in one last question. Kim's asking, I was just wondering if you had 3 top tips for mid-career colleagues who may be new to the area, who may be new to the idea of policy engagement. Can be a tough sell sometimes trying to generate enthusiasm.
Yeah, so I wrote a blog actually for the policy profession called Jubilation, Trepidation, Exasperation. And these, I think, kind of encapsulates the responses of colleagues at different career stages. So I was an early career researcher when I first engaged with policy colleagues, and it was jubilation. Oh my goodness, the government wants to know what I'm thinking. They want to hear about my research. I'm going to cancel everything else in my life because the government needs me. Woo, I'm going to tell everyone I know. My experience with mid-career colleagues is a little bit more trepidation. Like, why do they want me? Why don't they want like a more senior person than me? Like, pulled in many directions at this stage in my career. I'm not really sure if this is for me. And then exasperation from senior colleagues. Of course, I'm simplifying. This is not the case for everyone. But again, really, they want more stuff for free? No, delegate. So for those mid-career colleagues, I think it's really important to find a role model, find somebody at their own career stage who's doing this and enjoying it. I think that's really important. I think another top tip is think about how this does fit within career progression, right? If they're going to enjoy it, are they also going to get some benefit from it? And lastly, think about whether they do have time for it, because it's much better to say no than it is to say yes and then do it badly.
That's great tips. Thank you so much. I think that's all of the questions that we had in the chat. So thank you so much, Arlene, for the fab talk and also the reflections just now. I hope